What's up, guys? Welcome back to K's Daily Programming. This is part 5 of our SQL fundamentals video. So in today's videos, I'll be showing you guys constraints and we'll be going through some examples together. And if you guys haven't watched the first videos, I recommend that you watch those videos first. I'll put the link to those videos or a link to a full series in the description box below. So without wasting any of your time, let's get straight into this. So in today's video, I'll be explaining to you guys what constraints are and how to use them, and we'll be creating our second table, which is our students table. So constraints are nothing but rules for your columns. Some of the most popular constraints that we have when it comes to SQL, we have constraints such as not null, we have unique, we have primary key, we have foreign key, check, and default. So if you've watched the first videos that we went through, I'm sure you've seen not null and primary key before. Like I said in those videos, that I will explain these constraints in the next coming videos, and this is the video where I'll be explaining these constraints for you. This is not all of the constraints that you'll encounter in SQL Server. These are one of the most commonly used constraints out there. So the first one that we have, it's a constraint that we know as not null. So not null is a constraint for a column that ensures that a column cannot have a null value. So a null value, it's, let's say you were entering a data into a table and you had missing columns. Maybe you wanted to enter someone's surname and name and age, but then you don't know their age, and you can actually just enter the name, the first name and the last name, and leaving out the age. So a not null, it's a constraint where it will not allow you to enter a missing value. So it actually prevents you from entering rows with missing data. So that's what not null means. And for a unique is actually, it ensures that a value in a column are different. A unique can be null. So to give you a better explanation of what a unique is, so if you look at the table that we'll be creating today, which is our students table. So if you look at the student ID here, so the student ID, it's more of if you went to a college before or a varsity before, they give you what they call student numbers. So it's more like of a student number or your ID number. So it uniquely identifies a particular person. So not more than two people can have the same ID number. So in this case, not more than one student can have the same student ID. So the student ID must be unique across all the records. So if you have a student that already has an ID of 2023-001, there can never be another student with the same ID. So that's what unique checks for. So if you try to insert two records with the same student ID or with the same column that has a unique constraint, it will actually throw an error and tell you that this record already exists and it violates the rule that we have set for this particular column. That's what unique does. And moving on to our next constraint is, it's a primary key. A primary key is actually more of a combination of the two, of a not null and a unique key. But a primary key, as the definition says, it's a unique identifier. It uniquely identifies each row. It's a combination of a unique and a not null. So a primary key, unlike a unique can be null. A unique can have missing values or missing data. But a primary key, it ensures that the data, it's there and it's provided. It cannot be null. It's more of a combination of the unique and the not null. And then we go to a foreign key. So if you look at these constraints, there's two, the unique and the foreign key. I've made them in red text. That is just to highlight that in this video, I won't be going through them as examples, but I'll be showing you guys in the next video or in the next video after the coming one. So what a foreign key is, a foreign key, it prevents actions that will destroy links between tables. So a foreign key, to give an example, in a SQL world, a foreign key, it's a key that it's a primary key in another table. Yeah, I know that can be confusing, but for an example, I'm going to show you this. So here in our students table, we have a student ID, which is our primary key. So this is our primary key, As you can see, there's no keys that repeat after this. And never mind these, I just made these spaces so I can see the students better. So I was just trying to separate them. These are the first year students. These are the first year students up here, and the second block here is the second year students. As you can see by the year indicated with 1 and 2 and 3, and these ones here at the bottom, that the third year students. So never mind the lines here. I was just making that to separate the data. So a foreign key, like I said, if you look at a student ID here, it's our primary key in this table. So a foreign key, it's a key in a table that reference a primary key in a different table. So if you come here at marks, you can see that I have a table here that holds marks for students for different assessments in different modules. And the definition of the foreign key here says it prevents actions that will destroy links between tables. So what happens with the foreign key is it ensures if we have our student ID in this table as a foreign key, because we can't have this as a primary key, because if you look at this, I'm sure there's a one there's a one student ID or more than one that repeats. You can see this one if I actually search for the student ID. Let me just copy that first. You can see that it's there, and we have a second record there, and we have a third, and we have 3 records of that. So we can make that a primary key in this table. So in this table, we have a foreign key of student ID, but then the student ID, that foreign key must reference a primary key in a different table. So it will reference a primary key in this table. So what a primary key does is, a foreign key. So what a foreign key does is, when you enter a record that, let's say you enter a record for this row. So what a foreign key does is it will check if the reference table has this value. So if the student here, you're trying to enter the marks for the student for this row, it will go to the reference table, which is the student table, and check, do I have a student of the student ID? And if the student is there, it will take in the data. But if you try and insert the marks for a student that does not exist, for student ID that does not exist, it will come here in the students and search, do I have the provided student ID? If the student ID is not there, it will break and tell you it can't insert that because of the foreign key constraint. So take an example more of, let's say maybe if you were managing a store, or you were managing a database for a particular store. So in a store, you can have one table that describes a purchases made, and in another table you can have a table that references the quantities and the details of each and every purchase made. So one purchase can have a purchase record, the cashier name, and the time that that purchase was made. And in another table, you can have data that describes the purchase record. Obviously has to be there to reference the primary key in your purchase table. And then you can have the SKU code that was bought, the SKU description that was bought, and the quantity of the SKU that was, or the item that was bought. So in that second table that describes the order, the purchase number is actually the foreign key, and it references the purchase order in your purchase main table. I don't know if that makes sense. Some of this might be a lot or too much to take as we're just starting with this, but I'm sure it will make sense as we go forward. So let's just move on to our next constraint. So the next constraint that we have, it's check. So check ensures that the value in a column satisfied a specified condition. So what this means is, imagine if you were creating, let me just give an example with this. So if we're creating this the students table here, and you had a check for the year here, so you can specify a condition. A condition is something such as where maybe you want to check that when someone enters a year, it must be a valid year. It must be maybe a number that it's 1, 2, 3, or 4. If it's something that it's out of those options, it must give an error and say, hey, this is out of the constraints limit. So that's what a check does. It doesn't have to be only with numbers. It can be with anything. It can be with date. It can be with time. It can be with voucher, it can be whatever condition that you specify. So we'll just go through an example in the video when we create our table. And last but not least, we have a default. So a default sets a default value for a column if no value is specified. So if you've seen, or if you watched our last video when we created our table, we specified a column of ID that had an identity. So this is more or less, but this is not an identity. So it acts as what the identity did. So you specify a default value for a column that if someone tries to enter the data and doesn't give you a value for this column, put this value as the default. So that's what it actually does. So going back to the students table, imagine if you were entering this data into a table, and then most of the time when someone goes to a college, they're more likely to start as a first year. Well, someone can come as a second year, as a third year, or as a senior student. But 99% or 90% of the time when people go to a college, to a varsity, they go as first year students. So what you could do is you can actually make a default on your year column and say that when you enter the value for the student, if the data of the year is not provided, set that default value, or set that value that comes in as 1. So that will make it a first year student. But this only applies if the data it is not provided. And moving on to today's examples, let's just go and create our students table. So you just need to open your SSMS. And if you don't know how to use SSMS, I did a video on this. I think it was one of the first, I think the second video. So you can actually go back and look at that video on what SSMS is and what it's used for and how to install it. So here you just come to your databases, and last we did create our database. Here we have our fundamentals database, and if I just click on our database, we created a table already in here, I believe, of modules, and then we created this table for our data types examples. So today I'm just going to create another table. So the table that we're creating today, it's the students table. So I'm just going to go and click on the database and say create new query. And to save you guys some time, I've already written the script. So I'm just going to copy and paste them in here, and we'll just walk through them together. The best invention by mankind, copy and paste. So this is how our scripts are looking. So I believe that I just made an error or a typo. I can just cancel that and do that, put it a voucher. Okay, cool. So this is the table that we're creating today. So if you look at this, I believe I've showed you guys this before and said this is going to be our database that we're going to work with throughout this video. So what we're trying to do today is we're trying to create a table that it's same as this. So for this table, we have our 5 columns, which is the student ID, the first name, last name, year, and registered. So going back to SSMS, this is the table that we have. This is our students table. And again, if you don't know how to create a table, I've made a video on that. You can just go back to the series and you'll see a video that talks about creating a table. So this is the table that we're creating today. And we have our student ID column of a data type of voucher, and it holds 100 characters. And it has a constraint of a primary key. Like I said, so a primary key, it's a unique identifier. So which means in this table, we'll only have, if we have a student ID of 1, there will only be 1 row with a student number of 1. And if we have student ID of 2, there will only be 1 row with a student ID of 2. If we try and insert another row with the same student number or the same student ID that already exists, it should throw in an error and tell you that I already have this data in my table. It's the same as, kind of the same as a unique, but it cannot be null. So it's the combination of a unique and not null. And then we have our first name. This is going to hold our first names for students. So this data type of voucher. I don't know anyone with names, even if it's first name and middle name, that has more than 50 characters. Well, there are people with more names that have 50 characters, but it's not common. So I'm just going to put that as 50. Or I can just cancel that to 100. I mean, that is a sweet spot for most people. So let's just work with 100. We have our first name, which is voucher, and it holds 100 characters. And this column, it's not null. We went through the not null in our explanation. And we have our last name, And if you see our last name, it just says voucher 100 and it doesn't specify any constraint. And by default, if you try to create a table and you don't say not null, what your system is going to do is it automatically puts the null for you there, but you won't see it, like it's not there, but in the back end it actually tells the system that this is a null column. So if you're making a null column, you can actually put null if you want, but you can also omit it and just know by default that column it's null. So I don't think there's a need of writing it, because it's just more work. But just to keep things simple and straightforward, because we still new with this, I'm just going to keep the null there. And just know if you don't specify the not null, your column by default it's null. And now we're going to our year column, which is a data type of int. It is not null, and it is a check which checks if year it's in any of these values. So the in here, what the in actually means, it actually means if the year is equal to 1, or the year is equal to 2, or the year is equal to 3. So what you could do is you could substitute this with the code that it's like this, and you say or the best invention by mankind, like I just said, it's copy and paste, and say 2 or 3. So this is the same as saying in, but you can see this is more code than what we had before. So I'm just gonna put it back. I just wanted to simplify what that in means. So it's the same code as this, but it's less much of work. So we're just gonna put that there. So what this will do is each time when we insert a record, it will try and check, does the value of year that it's presented forward, is it equal to 1, or is it equal to 2, or is it equal to 3? So if it's not equal to any of these values, it will throw an error. But if it's equal to any of these 3 values, it will go through. And then we have our registered column, which holds a data type of int. It is not null, and also it has a check that checks if the registered is equal to 1 or 0. So one thing about SQL Server is it doesn't have like OP, object-oriented programming. It doesn't have data type of a boolean where you can actually say something is registered true or false. So most people just use 1 and 0 as the testing values, or you can use yes or no. But I figured out, or I think 1 and 0 it's much better than yes and no, and it's more common to most people. So what this will do is it will check if the registered value that is provided forward, it actually is equal to 1 or is equal to 0. And you can actually use these constraints, multiple of these constraints in one column. You don't have to say that one column can be, let's say maybe say not null. You can actually say not null, and you can actually put check, and actually put default, you can actually put. So as a matter of fact, what I want to do now is, since we have 2 columns that have the constraint of check, I actually want to omit this. I want you to change this and introduce in a default constraint. So what a default constraint does is, if I try to input a value and I don't give it, like I said in the explanation, I don't give it a value for this, it will actually put in the default value that was specified when you're creating a column. So most time when you go to varsity first time, or when it's first year, you're actually not registered. You are in the list, but you're not registered. So you're supposed to register, and then your status changes from not registered to registered. So by default, when you get into the varsity, you're not registered. So we'll keep that as a 0. So what this will do is, the first time when you enter your data and you don't give this registered a value, it will put the default value as a 0. So now let's just go ahead and create our table, execute, and our command completed successfully. And now we're going to insert our first data here. So what I did is I tried to separate the data as shown here in the spreadsheet. So if we just look at this, let me just squeeze that there. I don't want to do that. It's fine. Let me just put it here. So if you just look at this, so I said in this statement, we are giving it the student ID, the first name, last name, year, and registered. So which is this? This is our student ID. This is our first name. This is our last name. And these two, we can actually see that I didn't put them in single quotes, like I explained in the previous videos. If you're working with numerical values, you don't have to put them in single quote. You can put them if you want, they'll still go through, but it's not a professional way of doing that. The system knows that if it's a numeric, it doesn't have to have single quotes. So I'm not going to put single quotes on those. So it's the same data as the data that we have here in our spreadsheet. This is the first year data, and this down here is the second year data, and below we have our third year data. So I'm just going to execute this statement, and you can see the 3 rows were affected. As I said previously, if you're doing an insert and it says row are affected, it means those rows were inserted. If you're doing a delete and it says row are affected, it means those rows were deleted. If it's an update, it means they're updated. It depends on the action that you're performing at that particular moment in time. So now I'm just going to query our table and see the data that we already inserted in there. Our students. Oh my goodness. This is our student table. Let's just query that. And if you can look at our student table here, we do have a student ID of 2023-001, 2023-002, and 2023-003, which is this data here that we provided with the first name of Jack, John, and Amanda. And these are the values that we provided. So now I'm just going to try and show you guys something. So what I'm going to do now is, remember our default here for our default value. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to insert this first record. So let me actually just get rid of that there that says registered, and just get rid of that. So if you've watched the last videos, you know how to map these two together. So what I'm trying to do now is, I want to insert this record, but bear in mind here that I didn't provide the value for the registered or the value, for the value for the registered column for this particular row of Patrick Kabongo. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert this data, and you can see that one row here was inserted. And if I go back to query my table, you can see that that student is here. The data went through, but then he also has a value of registered, which is 0. But in our query here, I didn't specify that 0. So where actually the 0 is coming from is the default here, I set it to have a value of 0. So if I don't provide, like the definition said, if I don't provide a data for that particular column, it will take in the value for the default that was specified. So in this case, which means it was our 0 value here, which is our default. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that registered back and insert these two. I'm actually going to, let me take this out because I've already inserted this. So let me take this out and try. Do we have a null value that I can show you an example of? Okay, cool. So, I think there's a example for that in the, okay, so there's an example for a null in the below records. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert this the remaining records for the second year students. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert these 3, and those 3 records were inserted. And if we just go back to querying our table here, you can see that now we have 7 records in there. So remember our primary key. As we said, our primary key is something that must be unique and cannot be null. So now I'm just going to go back to the first statement here and try to insert this data again. So I'm just going to insert this first row, only this row, and see what's going to happen, because we already have a student of 2023-001, which is was our 2023, it's this one here. So we already have this student ID, and this is our primary key. So let's see what happens if we try to insert it again. So you can see here it gives me an error or feedback and saying a violation of primary key constraint. It gives you the name of the primary key and say cannot insert a duplicate key in object student, which is the name of our table. The duplicate key is the value. The duplicate key value is, then it gives you the duplicate key value that you are trying to input. So we already have a student with the student ID 2023-001. So if we try to insert it again, as is our primary key, it won't go through. Same as if it was our unique, it will not go through because we already have a record of that student ID. So going back to our last student, this is yeah, I believe this is the last two students that we have. So what's going to happen here is, if you can see here, I've specified the student ID, the year, and the registered, but I did not specify one column, which is our last name. But our last name here, you can see that it has a constraint of null, which means it can take in null values. So what that means is, if I try and insert this, you can there are a few more. What did I do? This registered, I missed something. This is our student ID. This is our year. Okay, this is in the wrong order. Oh, never mind. Oh, the name actually missed the first name. Okay, sorry about that. Just go to first name, because it told me here that. And one thing about this, what I love about mapping columns in your insert statement, you can actually insert data without specifying this, but then there's a drawback, as you can see here. One thing I love about specifying the columns that you want to insert, if you miss a value or if you put more values than what you mentioned, it gives you this feedback. So in here you can see that it tells you there are few columns in the insert statement than values specified in the values class. So this is a good thing, so I know what the error is and what the issue is, and I can simply fix it. So I missed to reference the first name here, as we have a student ID, the first name, the year, and registered. So let's just go and try and insert this video. Sorry, and insert this data. So let's just insert that. So 2 rows are inserted, and let's just try and query our students table. There's our students table, and these are the 2 records that we inserted that had no last names. So you can see here that it says now instead of saying the actual last name, because we don't know the surname of those 2 people. We didn't give it the surname, so it just the last name, it actually just put that as a null value. And there's one thing that I want to show you guys. There's a difference between a null and a white empty space. So now what I'm going to do is, if I were to I'm going to insert the very same records here, but I'm going to specify the last name. Let's say last name. So in here, I'm going to do this. This is not null. This is actually a white space. This here, like this is not null. That's just like an empty space. So an empty space is actually different from null. You can actually, if you want to insert a not null, you can actually say this, and your table will take the not null value. But I don't advise you to do that, since you can just omit that, and then your table will know that it's a null value, and you put null on itself. But what you can do is, I want to show you the difference between this and a not null. So I'm just gonna reference that there and say that's an empty space, and I'm going to insert, or it's going to give me an error because I already have these 2 students. So the last ID here was 5. I'm just going to increment this to 6 and just put a 7 there. Okay, and let's insert that data. So let me just do that. Let's order by our student ID. It's ascending by default. So now if you look at this, these are the 2 first rows that we inserted. They were not null, and you can see that it actually says not null there. And then these are the 2 records that we inserted, the 2 last records that we inserted, and these are not null. This is actually empty, like it's a white space. It's an empty white space. So there's a difference between an empty white space and a not null. I don't know how to explain this in simple terms, but imagine if you're building a car garage, and when you're building a car garage, you have the structure, the garage, it's there, but there's no car inside. That is actually an empty garage. But now it's where the structure, it's not there, like the garage itself, it's not there, not even the foundation. As the moment is just, it's just like ground. It's just a space where you're going to put your garage. So that is your null. Like there's nothing. You can't even compare it to something else. Like there's nothing. And an empty space, it's more of you have your garage. It's type of it's sort of the white space is sort of you have a value, but that value is kind of like empty. So there's a huge difference between not null and an empty space. And when you order stuff by maybe let's say a column that has not null and has empty space, that not nulls always comes first. So I can show you this. Let's just order this by last name by ascending. So you can see that the not null always comes first. So there's a difference between not null and an empty space. And if I were to maybe put a word class in here, never mind this statement, I'm just going to go through the statement in the next coming videos. I'm just writing all this to show you the difference between these two. So if I were to say give me all values or give me all columns of all rows, give me all columns where my last name it's actually an empty space, it's going to give me those two. Sorry, let me get rid of that. It's actually giving me these two that we inserted with the student ID of 6 and 7. But you cannot say give me something where last name is equal to now. As I said, this is different from having a value. So you can never say it's equal to now. So what you can say is give me all data or all columns from student where last name is now. Not equal to now, but is now. So it's going to give me these the two students that we inserted before these two, which is the 004 and the 005. So that's all the data that we have to insert for this video. So let me just go back and do this. And there's two students here which are not supposed to be on a database. I just want to go get rid of those students. Just go and do that. Then let's just select our students. So this is all the data that we have to create for this video. And if I go back to my spreadsheet, you can actually see that it's the same as this record over here. So that's all for today's video. That's all what I had to say on constraints. And like I said, these are not the only constraints that are out there when it comes to SQL Server. There's actually much more that you can actually go and set on yourself. So the assignment for this is you guys can go out and explore other constraints that you find out there, or maybe you can go and explore with the same ones that we did but have different examples on them. Because one thing about programming is you're never going to get better or you're not going to get good at it by just looking at videos and not practicing it. So it needs a lot of practice, and that way you can actually improve your skills. So that is all for today's video, and I'll see you guys in the next video where I believe we'll be doing update on table. So I'll see you guys in the next video. If you have watched this far, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and cheers.